The Labor Party decided on Friday night to parachute Kristina Keneally, who's currently in the Senate, into the safe seat of Fowler. Keneally lives on the north side of Sydney in a beachfront home, and Fowler is in Sydney's west. Keneally would be ousting a local candidate who's lived and served in the area her entire life, Tu Le. She's a lawyer dedicated to the community. She's also the daughter of refugees. The hypocrisy of this move was too much for some even in the Labor Party. Keneally says Keneally does not represent the diverse Western Sydney seat. She says this move is a huge failure for Labor on diversity. Let's bring in Labor MP Julian Hill and Liberal MP Dr Fiona Martin to discuss this. Welcome to the show, both of you. Julian, is Keneally right here that this is hypocrisy, that the Labor Party is pushing aside a local candidate who's a Vietnamese Australian for a white privileged woman who lives on the other side of Sydney?
Thanks, Shari. I'm conscious of the irony, perhaps, in me addressing this question because I represent the most multicultural council area, Greater Dandenong in southeast Melbourne, one of the most multicultural seats in the whole of the country, actually more diverse than Western Sydney. And as best we can tell, I'm fourth-generation convict stock. But it's an issue, actually, I don't want to be one of those tosser politicians who quotes themselves, but it's an issue I spoke 5 years ago today, actually, in my first speech to Parliament. I'm passionate about this, that when you look at our institutions of power in Australia, whether that's the Parliament, but also the judiciary, the military, the public service, they don't reflect the diversity of the communities that we serve. But this is not an issue just for the Labor Party or any individual seat. I look across the chamber at the government, and it's an issue that the whole Parliament needs to deal with. It's not a question about any individual seat.
But Julian, just to pick you up on that point, and this is, diversity is a key Labor issue. Do you think it's a problem that two of the most multicultural seats in the Labor Party are yours of Bruce and Fowler might be represented, and Fowler was represented by Chris Hayes, by white men?
So, in terms of Kristina, though, the question is about the media debate at the moment. It's about Kristina.
A white woman rather than a Vietnamese Australian, Tu Le.
Sure. So Kristina accounted for herself yesterday. She gave a very strong explanation of her ability to represent the community, her connection with the community, her experience in representing that community. I don't think anyone could be in any doubt that she will be a fierce warrior, a fierce advocate and an effective advocate for that community. My point remains that we need to look at the systemic issues, and I look across the chamber. You'd almost need to get to fingers and toes right now to count the number of Liberal MPs who are being challenged for their pre-selection. Fiona's one of them. But including Ian Goodenough in a safe seat in Western Australia. So I make the point, this is not an issue that affects any one party. The other point I'd make, Tu Le is a terrific young woman by all accounts. She's got an enormous future in front of her and a lot to offer. And I don't mean that in a condescending way at all. Australian politics for 100 years is replete with people who've put their hand up the first time, not got the gong, sometimes the second time, and on they go. It happened to Julia Gillard. It happened to Steve Bracks. He ran 2 or 3 times and lost before he then got in and became Victoria's longest-serving Premier, one of them.
Yeah, I take the point about what you're saying, but the issue here is that you have one of Sydney's most multicultural electorates. You have the candidate, Tu Le, being pushed aside to make room for a white woman who doesn't represent the community and who has no connection to the community. Fiona, it's kind of odd listening to the Labor Party run the lines that your party usually runs about how someone is very qualified for the role, even though they might be a man.
Look, this is a question for the Labor Party. I'm representing the people of Reid, very busy doing that, can I say? But it's really up to the people of Fowler to decide whether they want somebody like Senator Kristina Keneally to represent them. But this really seems to be about Kristina Keneally and less about the people of Fowler. First, Senator Kristina Keneally had a crack at state politics. Then she tried in Bennelong. Then she moved to the Senate. And now we're going out to the Greater Western Sydney, to the seat of Fowler. The only thing that Kristina Keneally fights for is her job.
Look, I think let's just have a quick look at what Keneally had to say about this over the weekend.
Diversity and equality and multiculturalism can't just be a trope that Labor pulls out and parades, while wearing a sari and eating some kung pao chicken to make ourselves look good. To be in a position where they are pushing aside a community representative from one of the most multicultural electorates is hypocrisy.
Julian, isn't she right when she says those words?
I've got enormous respect for Anne, and I've spoken to her. We're friends, actually. She's an inspiration to people right across the country. But I make the point, this is not about one seat. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to play the game if that's what you want. I'm not expressing a view. This is a matter for the New South Wales branch. I don't have a vote. Maybe if I had a vote, I'd express a view. But I make the point that Kristina will be a terrific advocate. But just to pick up one other point that's been talked about, Kristina doesn't live there now. Well, honestly, big deal. This is a nonsense. This is the national parliament. It's not a local council. She was the Premier of New South Wales. She's a senator. She's represented communities like this. Throughout Australian political history, people move. Barnaby Joyce was a Queensland senator. Now he represents a New South Wales seat. That really is a furphy and a distraction.
Julian, I have to completely disagree with you there. She's not just in the next seat, she's in the other part of Sydney. She's in Northern Beaches, in a waterfront home. You can't get a different part of Sydney, you can't get a different constituency, and when you are an MP, you do have to represent and understand that constituency. And every time an MP hasn't lived in their seat, and Fiona will know this because who was in her seat before, I've just lost his name, with the glasses. Laundy, thank you. He moved out of his seat, and he also moved to Hunters Hill in a waterfront home. I wrote the story. That's how I know about it, although I did just misplace his name. It's a big story. People hate it when the MPs think they can represent them and they're too good for the seat and they don't live in the seat and they just use it as a way to get into Parliament. So people do care about that. This is an issue.
I agree with that. But the commitment's been made to move into the seat. That's the point I'm making. The Barnaby Joyce example is a valid one. He was a Queensland senator. He moved into his seat and he represents his seat fiercely. This is not a new thing. It's been happening for over 100 years. John Curtin, arguably Australia's greatest Prime Minister, was an activist in Melbourne, ran in Melbourne, didn't win, went to Fremantle in Perth. The point is, you need to be part of the community. It needs to be we, not them. I totally get that. I absolutely agree with that. But I do reject the point that we can't have people of the highest calibre, someone who currently represents the whole state, put their hand up to move to a different place. That is a nonsense, and it's never been the case.